The next topic in LO2 is classification of information. So in other words, what class is this information in? And the list the exam board give us are sensitive, non-sensitive, private, public, personal, and so on. There's a list here. Okay, so let's kind of have a look at what these are. It can get a little bit confusing because some of these can be combined. Information can be sensitive, and it can also be confidential. It could be completely anonymized, and it can also be private. It can be public, but not classified. Okay, so there are some things clearly that don't work together, but there are occasions when information can be business information and it can be public because it's available freely on their website. So you need to make sure that you understand the difference between information that is sensitive and non-sensitive, information that's confidential, such as medical information that you wouldn't want people other than people who need to know, such as your doctors and nurses, etc. That information should not just be available everywhere. So is it also private information? If it's partially anonymized, this could be a research, for example, that's been done, but people's names have been taken out of it. So we don't know who had the medical issue when the research was done. We just see the findings. Or it could be completely anonymized. So the information may be available to us, but it may have been redacted in some way. Anything to do with the military that's classified may have been completely removed from that document. And the key thing, which is why it's in red, is you also need to kind of have an understanding of the impact of this different type of information on the stakeholders. So how does it affect individuals and businesses? And do they have a responsibility around sensitive, classified, public, personal, confidential information? And later on, when we look at the laws, we begin to see that there are rules and regulations in place around keeping this information safe and secure, so that anything that is private or confidential or classified, sensitive, for example, isn't just freely available for anybody to have access to. So the first thing is to be clear on what these different classifications, of information, what do they mean? And then what does that mean for people who have either responsibility or access to this particular information? So a fairly straightforward exam question on this can be seen here. So we have some information, again, in a case study that tells us that some data that the case study holds could be or can be partially anonymized. And what you need to do here is explain for 2 marks, what does it mean if the data is partially anonymized? And then for the second part of the question, it gives us what looks like an obvious credit card number and asks us to partially anonymize the data. And this is a term called obfuscation, which you hopefully have come across in other units. And it's to do with deliberately hiding information so that, obviously, in the terms of passwords and credit card details, we often see them X'd out or dots instead of characters, so that people just can't look over our shoulder and grab that information and obviously use it because it's confidential. So let's have a look at what the exam board suggests were good answers for defining the term partially anonymized. Okay, so 2 marks. Part of the data, because it's partial, is replaced by a symbol, such as an asterisk, an X, as we mentioned, or a dot in the case of Windows passwords. So it's replaced with a symbol. So you can't see it. It's partially hidden. Okay, so that's what that is. So 1 mark for explaining it's only part of the data, and another mark for explaining how it's anonymized. And one mark for partially anonymizing this data, if you just cross out like what you normally get if you pay by credit card or by debit card, is normally they might just ask you for like the last 4 digits, or when you type it in, you might see X's. So if you've crossed some of this out or X'd it out, you've given an example by adding symbols to partly anonymize the data. If you drew X's or circles, square boxes, something over these numbers to show that some of the data is still there, but some of it's been hidden by a symbol, so we can't see the whole number, then that would give you the second. So that would give you the mark on that question there. So you just have to anonymize part of that data by removing it in some way. Right, so that's what that's about. So be clear about the differences, and be clear about responsibilities and how it impacts on the stakeholders who are responsible for making sure this data is anonymized or kept sensitive, private, public, etc., etc.